So we're here on Daf Tzadi Hey, Amud Aleph, and we're up to the two dots, which is the fourth line of the wide lines. And at this point, the Gemara is going to try to explain the brisa of what we call Iser Kal. And the Gemara says, my Iser Kal. We had a Kal V'chomer from an Iser Kal, and based on this Kal V'chomer, we concluded that if a man has a relationship with the wife, with the sister of his wife, then he's not allowed to return to his wife. Amar Rav Chizda, Machzir Gushaso Mishenises. So we're talking about a case of a man who remarried his divorced wife after she had married someone else, and that someone else divorced her. So the Torah says he's not allowed to remarry his wife after she was married to someone else and divorced. And that's relatively an Iser Kal because it's only a violation of a law. And now we want to understand the key two words of this brisa that have to be understood is Nesar HaOser. So if we had the big white board here, we'd write on the board Nesar HaOser. Ba'aleh Hai. After the first husband divorced his wife, and the second husband had a relationship with her, is Asra Alei Dahai. He generates an Iser on the first husband, because now it's Grushaso Shenises. Is Asra Alei Dahai. Now, Ba'aleh Idach, if the first husband violates the Iser of Machzir Gushaso, the Lav, and he has a relationship with his ex-wife, then Asra Alei Dahai. Now he generates an Isur onto the second husband. And the reason for that is because now, as far as the second husband is concerned, who divorced his wife, she now had a relationship with her, she married a relationship with her first husband, and that's going to generate an Iser on the second husband. That's called Nesar HaOser, correct? The second husband is the Oser on the first husband. And now, if the first husband has a relationship with that same woman who became Asura Olav because of the second husband, now he generates an Iser on the second husband. So the Gemara rejects this. Ma machzir gushaso mishenises. There are a number of differences. I think we'll get three differences between the case of Machzir Gushaso Mishenises and the case of Achos of Achos Ishto. Number one, Shekein Nitma Guf, because there was a bia between the first husband and the wife, and that's called Niskacha V'Nivala Achrei Shenisgarsha Mibayla, and the Torah calls that Achrei Asher Hu Tama. So it's the Tuma that generates an Isur on the Baal, and furthermore, the Od Isura Barov. Anyone who would have a relationship with this woman after Gerushin would generate an Iser on the Megarish. And furthermore, isura isur olam. There's no heter whatsoever to the isur lav of machzir gushasa liachar shenises. Let's calculate the case of achos ishto in the opposite of all these 3 points. Number one, there was no tuma begufa. In other words, as far as his wife is concerned, he had a relationship with her sister, but there was no tuma on his wife. And therefore, even if you'll want to generate an isur on the achos, meaning on his own wife, by virtue of the shchiva that he had with her sister, that isur cannot be created by rov b'nei adam. Right? It's only someone who's married to her sister who could create that isur. If somebody else would have a relationship, that wouldn't generate that isur. And furthermore, the isur of achos ishto only applies during the life of his wife. With the death of his wife, there's a heter to marry her sister. In contrast to machzir gushasa, which is an isur olam. So the bottom line of this whole discussion is that we cannot derive from machzir gushasa any sort of conclusion about an isur in the case of somebody who had a relationship, a marriage relationship with the sister of his wife, to generate an isur on his own wife. Hello, Amarav Reish Lakish Yevamot. The isur kal, which is the basis for this kal v'chomer, from which we want to derive an isur on his wife because he had a relationship with her sister, is Yevamot. Yevamot leman. What be'ila did the Yevamot have, which was the isur? And based on that isur, we're going to apply the principle of nesar ha'oser. Ilema li'acher. If we're talking about a zar, right? The Torah prohibits Tolsia Echta Mes Achutza Lish Zar. And this Shomeres Yavam had a relationship with an Ish Zar, and that generates an Isur Yibum, Kid Rav Hamnuna, the Omer Rav Hamnuna, Shomeres Yavam, Shizin Sasur Liyavama. That's through this nus of Adam in Ashuk of a Zar, the Yavama becomes Asur Lisyabim. The Yavam. And in that sense, it's similar to an H's each situation who had a znus, which generates an Isur on her husband. So therefore, the Brisa has in mind the following kal v'chomer. In the case of Yavam, who's the Oser, he now becomes the Nesa. Right? He was the Oser that generated the Isur of Yavam Ashuk. Now he becomes Nesar with her Maisa's Nus. And this is all an Isur Kal. Is Kolshkein, how much more so in the Isur Kari situation of Achos Ishto, the relationship that he has with Achos Ishto should certainly generate an Isur on his wife, her sister. And the Gemara rejects it. There's a pirch on this Kal V'chomer. Mali Yevama Shikein Nitma Haguf. Once again, this Yevama had a relationship with an Ish Zar, and that's called Tumas Haguf. And furthermore, the Isura Berov, in other words, she's Asur to the entire world, except for the Yevama, of course. And that makes it into an Isur Chamur. And as a result of this Isur Chamur, she becomes Asura, according to Rav Hamnuna's principle here, on the Yavam. In the case of a man who has a relationship with the sister of his wife, there was never a Maisa that was done to be Mitami the goof of his wife. And this Isur of Achos Ishto is exclusively an Isur on the husband of her sister. if she would have a be'ilu with anyone else in the world, there's no Isur. So therefore, it's possible that his wife would not be Asura Olav as a result of the relationship that he had with her sister, Ella. But rather, what does Reish Lakish have in mind? Yevamot li'ach. Now, what's Yevamot li'achim? When does a Yevama become Asura to the other brothers, the other Yevamim? That's after Maimar. So one brother did Maimar, and that generates an Isur on the other brothers. And if one of the other brothers now has a Bia relationship with her, then at least on a Drabana level, he has violated an Isur of Yevamot li'achim. Avid ba Maimar Hai, Asara alei dahai. Let's say we'll call him Yavam number 1. He had a Maimar, which is a Kinyan D'Rabbanan on the Yevama, and that just generates an Isur D'Rabbanan on Yavam number 2. Ba'aleh Idoch, now Yavam number 2 had a illegitimate relationship with the Yevama, violating an Isur D'Rabbanan. Asra. Now here we have to make an important point. Once the second Yavam has a Bia relationship, that's Yibum. On a Deraisa level, that's Yibum. Again, Midrabanan, he was prohibited from doing so because of the mimer of his brother. But Lamaisa, she becomes now a full-fledged Eishes Ish D'Oraisa. That's called Asra Alei Dahai. She's now Asura on the first husband. As a result of the Yibum, which generates Ishus and makes her into an Eishes Ish. So now the Gemara says we can understand the Kal V'chomer according to Reish Lakish. Why? If the first Yavam was able to generate an Isur on the Yavam, on the second Yavam, he's the Oser, and now he becomes the Nesar after the second Yavam has a Bia with the Yevama. And that's called a violation of an Isur Kal. An Isur Kal meaning an Isur D'Rabbanan in this context, based on Maimar. So how much more so now in the Kal V'chomer that each to Asura Olav, Asura Olav Esachosa, she can generate an Isur on the husband of her sister, meaning her sister and her husband, when he had a relationship with the sister. That's an Isur Chomer, that's an Isur Kares. So the Gemara asks, okay, now this next piece I worked on very hard. See if I can figure it out. My area shebala sheni afilu ovid banami maimar. What is generating the Isur on the first Yavam? We assumed that it was the Bia of the second Yavam, which would mean that if there was no Bia on the part of the second Yavam with the Yevama, then the first Yavam is perfectly legitimate and he could be miyabim. And we assumed that it was only the Bia that generated an Isur on the first Yavam. But the Gemara is now suggesting that there's a whole nother way of understanding the Isur on the first Yavam. And that has to do with what's called Zikas Yibum. So we're wondering now the following. The Gemara is vacillating. What is the nature of the Isur that's generated by the second Yavam onto the first Yavam? Is it the Bia? And then we could begin at Kal V'chomer and ask about the bia of Achos Ishto. And now we have an analogy. Or no, has nothing to do with the bia. The Isa that's generated on the first Yavam is a relationship, is a result of Zikas Yibum. And I'll prove it to you, says the Gemara. Afilu Ovad Ba Maimar. Afilu Ovad Ba Nami. Nami means he too, the second one. So the first Yavam gave her a Maimar. Now the second Yavam gives her another Maimar. Now we're assuming now, this is a machlokus between Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim back on Daf Nun. We're assuming now, like the Rabbanan Shita, that Yesh Maimar Acher Maimar, which means that even though one of the Achim, one of the Yavam gave a Maimar, this to generate an Isa on the other Yevamim, well, that's the Rabbanan. That so too, if a second brother gives a second Maimar, he too will generate an Isser as a result of his Maimar. And all this is based on Zika. That since the Torah says there's a Zika, the Maimar sort of takes you over crosses you over the boundary line, and it makes the Zika into like a full-fledged Ishus, Mirabana. And that's what generates these. But it has nothing to do with the Bia. And it's a unique halacha in Zikas Yibo. So you cannot extrapolate from Zikas Yibum and derive conclusions about Eishes Ach. About Achos Ishta. The Gemara says no. Holo Kasha. The interpretation of the Brisa based on Reish Lakish is Rabbi Gamliel, is reflecting the unique sheet of Rabbi Gamliel. Di Omar Ein Maimer Achar Maimer. So therefore, I had the second Yavam follow the first Yavam with a Maimer. That second Maimer would be meaningless. It doesn't register at all. And the only way the action of the second Yavam could generate an Isa on the first Yavam is Bia, because that Bia, as we said before, is H's each. And now we're able to reinstate the Kal V'chomer. But the Gemara now asks a different kasha. Ella, we should ask a kasha on Reish Lakish. Afilu nosan la get, afilu choletz la. Again, I'm going to prove to you that it's not the bia of the Yavam Sheni that generates an Isa on the Yavam Rishon. Even if he would give her a get or chalitza, again, we're talking about the Sheni now, the second Yavam, already Osra al ha Rishon, the Baal HaMaimer. So once again, the Isser has nothing to do with Bia. The Isser that's generated here has to do with Zikas Yibum and a get which breaks up the Zikas Yibum on a Drabanan level, or Chalitz even on a Doraisa level. Once again, there's no analogy to the Isser of Achos Ishto, because the Maisa Bia here is the Oser in the case of Achos Ishto. But here we're talking about a Yavam, we're not talking about a Maisa Bia at all. He just gave her a get or a Chalitza. So we don't have a Kal V'chomer from some place where Bia is the Oseres. Elam Rabbi Yochanan Sota. What is the Isser Kal that we're talking about in the Brisa, from which we're going to derive a Kal V'chomer? The Isser Sota. Again, the Gemara analyzes. Sota Laman. To whom did this Sota, with whom did she have the Ilah? Ilema LeBaal. In other words, after the Baal gave her Kini and Stira, he himself, the Baal, had a relationship with her. Baal Baal. And what's the repercussion of that Be'ilah, which was again Be'isur, is Asra Alei de Boel. He generates an Isra on the Boel. Now, I don't understand this Havamin. I wouldn't say that the Isra on the Boel is a result of Baaleh Bailam. I mean, once it's Kini and Stira, that itself generates an Isa on the Boel. I mean, I think that's what the Gemara is going to point out, but I don't know what the Gemara is thinking now. So anyway, we're going to have a Kal V'chomer now that if the Boel that generates the Isa on the Isha, which is her husband, now he becomes a Nesar by virtue of the Be'ila of the illegitimate Be'ila of the Baal, which is, by the way, an Isser Lav of a Nitma, but it's only an Isser Kal, then how much more so in the case of a sister who's married to so-and-so, she is the Osra al-Baila of Achosa, and now she becomes Asura herself as a result of the Bia of Achosa, which is an Isser Chomer of an Isser Karis, and that's the Kal V'chomer. Versus my area, Baalea. Are you telling me that the reason that she became Asura to the Boel is because the Baal had a relationship with her? Afilu Nasan Lo Get, even if the Baal immediately delivered a get, V'afilu Omar, if the Baal says Einani Mashka, so I'm not interested in being Mashka, so she remains Asura LeBoel until after she drinks from the Mei Merorim. So her stira, meaning after she violated the kinui, that's what generates the Isra on the Boel. Forget about whether the Baal had a beer with her or not. It's totally irrelevant. And again, there's no analogy now to the Isra of a Chosisha where the Maisa Bia is the Oser. And it's very possible that the Maisa Bia to her sister is not going to generate an Isra on this sister, on the Oser, meaning the one that she's married to the husband. So we don't find a Kal V'chomer from a place where the Bia is an Oser. So the Gemara explains, Ella says the Gemara, let's interpret Rabbi Yochanan and the Bryce in light of Rabbi Yochanan as Sota LeBoel, that it's the Boel who generates the Isra on the Baal. And now we have a Kal V'chomer. If the Baal, who's the Oser on the Boel, because he married this woman, now he becomes Osur Be'ishto when she had a Be'ilu to the Boel, that's an Isser Kal. Now, again, I don't understand the half of meaning of the Gemara. How could you possibly classify the adulterer as an Isser Kal? That's beyond my comprehension. But anyway, Kolshkein, in the case of Ishto, who was the sister that generated the Isser on her sister, certainly she becomes Asura L'Baila when the Baal has a relationship with her sister, the Isser Chamur of Isser Kares. So Gemara says, hi, Isser Kalhu, Isser Chamur, Dainu Eich. We're talking about a Chi of Misa here. How could you possibly classify it as an Isser Kal?